This is Pat Bird again. In this mini lecture, I'd like to look at the language that's involved in the reading and writing that's required of students in their content courses. So we're looking at the characteristics of academic English. Before we get started, please, there are 2 documents on the ACE Angel site that I'd like for you to look at while we're, well, actually before we start talking. If you could get the textbook sample, it's PDF that shows several of the first, I think it's the first 3 pages of the textbook used in CLP 1006. And then the a PDF called Grammar Differences in Different Types of Communication. So if you can get those 2 documents open on your computer, read ahead on them, pause me for a while you look at those. You can certainly print them if you want to, but you might prefer just to read them on the computer to see if you really want copies. The ACE staff will be really happy to help you get those documents. If you look at those first 3 pages of the textbook used in the psychology course, you'll see that from the very beginning in the textbook, students find 3 different kinds of communication that are rolled into one. There's conversational writing, where the writer asks questions and uses fragments as answers and addresses you as the reader, and very informal language. Then there are recounts of research that are small narratives with past tense, chronological order, proper names, and pronouns, just like little stories. And then the core content, the psychology terms, and the really complicated wording for those concepts. So students have to go from conversational writing to recounts of research to core content and back again. It's all mixed up together. So we can expect that academic textbooks are going to be pretty much like that in all fields. There'll be core content, which is discussions, presentation of, and discussion of theory, definitions of really important terms that you have to know to really understand the theory and be able to write about it, talk about it. Conversational interactions with the reader, trying to connect to the reader, trying to make the core content relevant to newcomers to the content. And then narratives, the history of the field, or retelling of relevant research projects. So core content, conversational interactions, and narratives are all part of textbook writing. The language of conversation, as research shows it, includes these grammatical features. Conversation just about always uses present tense, using be many times as the main verb, contractions, fragments rather than complete sentence, a lot of question asking in conversation, and the questions go back between you and I, we. Vocabulary that's common to speaking, hedges, about, almost, like, a lot, sure, for sure, really. We don't see much and I in written things, but sometimes people try to imitate that. So these are the kinds of things that are characteristic of conversation. Present tense, contractions, fragments, questions, certain pronouns, and then some vocabulary. When teachers look at that list, we start to see that there are a lot of things that lie behind it that you have to know to be able to do those things well. So there are the differences between speech and writing, and being able to understand how, there's students who talk like books, or there's students who write like this conversation, and not understanding how the 2 are different and where to use them properly. Answering questions, the verb forms to understand contractions, needing to know those. There's also present tense. You have to be able to handle subject-verb agreement. I think there's a really serious question for us here about what students are supposed to do with this part of the textbook materials. Students are accustomed to thinking of the textbook as the source of things that they memorize for a test, but these materials are not intended for that kind of thing. They're really to help include the reader, to appeal to the reader, to try to make things a little bit easier for the reader to understand the content. So it's a particular kind of reading that the students have to process differently from the way they work with the little pastime narratives that show up. So they're recounting research, giving the history of the field as background to current work, presenting history for history courses or humanities courses. Now, research tells us that the language of pastime narrative includes foreground and background. Foreground is the narrative line itself, what the writer says happened. And then there's background, there's all the things that the writer gives you to try to help you understand the foreground. And so those things are often culturally, well, what information do you need to understand to know why somebody did something, or what happened before this thing happened. So foreground and background are characteristic of narratives. Past tense, proper nouns, the names of the people involved. Here, where conversation uses you and I and we, in narratives we get he, she, it, they. Verbs often are say or report kinds of verbs. Present participle clauses, adverbials of time for the chronological organization. And then sometimes a moral, any information about the reason that the story is given and why it's important. Now, if we look at this research list with a teacher's eye, what we see is that to do it, you're going to have to know regular and irregular verbs. You'd have to understand how names are used, first name, last name. You'll have to understand complex sentence formation to get those participle clauses. You'll have to deal with chronological organization and the time adverbs needed to signal it. So there's also the huge reading challenge of knowing the main storyline from the added explanatory information background. So again, another question is, what do students do with this kind of material? I think it's something we might want to ask the teachers who use these textbooks. Are students tested on these narratives? Are they expected to be able to explain what happened in them in their testing? So what happens with this material? Now, the core concept. This is really what we think the textbook is about. And academic content is presented in long, complicated noun phrases and very short verbs, often in the present tense, forms of be, forms of have. There are a lot of prepositions, but the prepositions are used with noun phrases, the children in the bus kind of prepositional phrase. And a lot of or more agentless passives than in other kind of writing. Typically, academic writing and newspaper writing involve more passives than other kind of writing. Now, it's not that passive is the dominant form. It is still a minor form. The active is the major thing in all kinds of writing. But academic writing, the things that students read in these textbooks, long, complicated noun phrases, prepositions in those noun phrases, present tense verbs, and some passives showing up. So students have to know, and this is what teachers see behind that list, noun types and forms, regular, irregular nouns, prepositions and knowing which prepositions to use with nouns and how long that noun phrase is, where it starts and stops, working with passive sentences and verbs, regular and irregular verbs, and complete sentences compared to fragments, because they're going to be seeing some fragments in those conversational bits and then these rather long formal sentences in the content section. And then what do students do with this part? Well, we're a little bit clearer about that. We assume that this is the part that's going to be tested, the part they're supposed to learn. So here the students need to deal with something that's going to be part of the grading for the course and what they're supposed to take away from the course. Now, another thing that we saw in looking at the ACE materials and thinking about the courses at Miami-Dade and observations of teachers about problems students have had is, first, that the basic purpose for entry-level undergraduate courses is to prepare students in that area, to get them ready to read, write, and talk about a specialized area of study. It's getting them grounding in some area that's important are judged to be important by the college and really by society. So they're supposed to know something about psychology and something about biology and something about how to write, and then from those finding out what kinds of things they want to specialize in more. so that a lot of what's going on in those entry-level courses is learning the language of that field, learning the vocabulary of that field, learning how that field thinks and presents these ideas in writing. And at the same time, students encounter words and phrases that are used to name academic tasks they're required to carry out. And these names they see in the syllabus and they hear from their teachers, and those names start to overlap. Essay, paper, research paper, journal article, journal entry. Students may never have really seen a bound journal article, and they are writing journals themselves. So what does journal mean? Does it mean something that you go and read in, or is it something that you do your own writing in? So students you need to be really careful that students understand what those terms are. So there are challenges in this academic English and the writing that students have to read for teachers and students. First, students read a lot. And these 4 courses combined in one academic term, students are expected to read approximately 770,000 words over that term. Students read really very different kinds of materials, linguistically different kinds of materials, along with the textbooks with their folding together of 3 different kinds of language. The reading assignments include internet materials, blogs, course support systems like ULearn and Angel, links to readings, online self-assessments, and all kinds of other things that they have to handle. And then students write several different kinds of academic registers. They write research and non-research based reports, they do PowerPoint slides or presentations, and of course they do testing. So they're writing many different kinds of things that have different requirements for not just content, but for the language that's used in them. 3 main points in their implications. First, academic writing usually includes several different types of quite different language, even in a single source such as a textbook. So students need to know that textbooks are not just one kind of thing. They have to be able to sort out what they're reading into the subcategories and then have strategies for handling those subcategories. They might even need to take a highlighter or a marker and subdivide the text as they go along to be able to find the different things. They need help in deciding how to use the language they're reading in their own writing. So if they read conversational things and contractions in fragments in the textbook, are they going to be allowed to use that kind of language in their own writing? Point 2, grammar comes in clusters. So the grammar students have to use involves clusters of grammar for different purposes. Narrative includes past tense verbs, also proper nouns, personal pronouns, chronological adverbs. So those things tend to come together. If you find past tense, just about always you're going to find proper nouns and personal pronouns and chronological adverbs all together. Those things come together as a package and need to be studied together as a package. Academic discussions of core content don't just have present tense. Of course they have present tense, but present tense with big words, long noun phrases, and abstract content. So the language that's used involves a cluster of grammatical features. In the ACE Angel Science, you can find a handout called Grammar in Context that lists some of those grammatical patterns and different communications types. I hope that you can use that list and talk with other teachers and make plans about what grammar to teach and how to teach it in a cluster so that students are working on narrative or working on core content and working on the language that they will have to use, the pattern and cluster of language for each of those things. And we need to, yet again, remember that students encounter traditional but overlapping names for academic tasks. So, and we don't think about it anymore. We know the difference between a journal entry and a journal article, but students don't. So they need help in learning the task types and then the names that teachers are likely to use for those tasks. And that involves they need to know how to read a syllabus and then get information from their teachers about the task required in that syllabus. Well, finally, and again, the value of corpus studies for EAP. By studying the materials that students are assigned and encounter, so the real things students use, we learn about the vocabulary they have to have, We learned about the grammar associated with those words and how the words are used in sentences. And then we can look at materials used in the corpus to understand why certain language is being used. So we can get a clearer picture, not just of the linguistic challenges of general education courses, but also the academic skills required for using that language.